Good morning and welcome. This is Federico Lucifredi, Senior Product Manager for SUSE Linux Enterprise. Today, we want to give you a quick walkthrough of the latest and greatest release of WebBased, our 1.1 release, which is being included with the upcoming refresh of the Appliance Toolkit. Without further ado, let's just jump right in. This we have here is the console of the WebBased Interface. The framework exposes two web services on the network, one providing the API to access the functionality and the other one exposing the UI itself. Think of it as the web UI that you have on your local network access system at home. You have a very minimal web interface to make sure that your Wi-Fi access point has the configuration it needs to function, and just as much as it needs. That's WebBased's mission, to bring an appliance out of its state as a stock image that has never been deployed on your network. You have unfrozen it and deployed on your virtualization system, and now it has to be configured to be put into production. So we log in. And we have gained access to the configuration interface as it was set up at the time when this appliance was integrated. Two quick comments here. Firstly, browser support. We support Firefox 3.5 or newer, of course, but given the realities of today's data center, we also support use on Internet Explorer for those of you that are under a corporate policy in terms of browsing, or just happen to be sitting at a Windows machine. Secondly, and this is primarily for ISVs, although it could be applicable to enterprises as well, the framework is not frozen in stone. It's a framework, as it were. What does this mean? These controls that you see can be configured. You can choose which set of them to ship with which appliance, to limit or enhance the configuration options that you give your users according to what the workload encapsulated by the appliance itself is. Let's dive into one of the modules. For instance, time configuration. Very basic functionality, but something that pretty much any system needs to operate correctly. Have it from my colleague on pretty good authority that this was assembled in Central Europe, so this makes perfect sense. However, I'm not there, so I'm going to configure it for where we are, and this is a Linux system, so obviously the hardware clock is set to UTC. I could configure the time manually, but as it were, it's actually quite accurate, and I could set up what network time protocol server to use for automatic synchronization. And that is all that I realistically need to set up time. And it's exposed through the web interface. It's very intuitive, very simple, user-friendly, and skinnable. A vendor that's integrating something customized could configure this web page to look according to a template that they might define differently from our default look. Let's take a look at another module. For instance, network configuration. This is probably the single most used module in terms of bringing any appliance into operation. You're in a virtualized environment. Your pipeline to the world is the network. Your virtual machine is going to come up with default configuration that enables it to be reachable by other hosts, and as in this case, you see that it's in automatic configuration, but you might need to fiddle and define things more specifically. As you can see, there is support for manual configuration, and we don't need to touch that, but hostname, default, interesting. Let's give it a little bit more character. and we have the configuration customized for this instance of the virtual machine. Another module, and most likely my favorite, is the status overview page. This is a monitoring facility. It's very simple, very intuitive. It's not Nagios, but it gives you at a glance a very nice overview of what's been going on from this virtual machine. There is a little bit of traffic. Memory consumption, let's see, we probably are doing just fine. CPU is probably stellar. Yeah, we're barely putting a dent in there. So you can see, you can check if any of the basic variables that would give you an idea of the health of the system has been pushed to the limit and is likely starting to cause problems in terms of the application hosted in the VM being in trouble. Very nice. As I said, this is probably my favorite module. One more thing worthy of note before we skip to the next module. Here you see the console exposing all modules and with no restrictions. You can go where you need to, you know what you want to do, you can alter whatever tunable you need. There's an alternate setup where you configure WebBased to expose a wizard interface first time the user logs in, so that you can force the configuration to be carried out in certain steps. For instance, an ISV might want to make sure that network is configured, time is configured, registration, most likely needed for their business model, and so on. So they could set up a workflow to have the user go step by step and go through the modules as a wizard. Ensure that a new user has been created, new password has been set up, as opposed to the default for security policy, and so on. This is more of an administrator view where you're landing directly in the console, and this is what the system will default to after the wizard has been completed. Here I'm going to show you only this view. However, in Novell's video gallery, there is another recording that we have made on the previous release, which shows you the wizard view. So if you're interested in setting that up, go over to the other WebBased demo and you can see the wizards in action. Now, two more modules which to me are a great exercise in minimalistic yet extremely effective user interface design. First one is system services. System services exposes the initd services that have been running in the system. So let's say, for instance, that the monitoring console that we were just looking at was acting strange, and I would head over here to see if the daemon collecting the system statistics that we've just seen is running smoothly. And of course it is. It was working just fine. Here we have a very concise, very effective view of what is running, what is set to run by default, what is set to never run, and so on, of your system services. Very nice, very polished access to the initd system. The other module is even simpler. It's actually delightful. It's the firewall configuration. See, we can turn on the firewall. We can say which services we want to let through or not let through just with a single click, and that's it. It's extremely simple, extremely effective. I love it. It's really nice design. Now we're almost out of time, so let me show you two more things that are interesting before closing. First one we won't go too much into. As already mentioned, there is a registration module. This is used to activate your services with the ISV that you source the appliance from, or to configure your registration with Novell if you are an enterprise customer of ours. Once that has been taken care of, you can configure what the state of update of your appliance is, patch the system as needed, and you can add additional repositories if you so choose. So the web-based interface has full software management integrated in it. This is quite a nice touch, and it gives you flexibility in having the items separated in different modules so that when you integrate the appliance, you can choose which parts to expose to customers or to users in this manner. The second bit is our user configuration. With this release, we have added the capability of configuring the appliance to leverage identities which are not contained in the appliance. Most identities are usually kept in identity vaults, dedicated servers that do this job. You do not configure every user on every single machine. That's not practical. So when you're deploying an appliance, one of the first things that you need to do after setting up the network is setting up what users have access to it. Let's, for example, look at the LDAP configuration. It is really very self-explicative. You can configure the appliance to retrieve user identities from a local LDAP server. Doesn't need to be on your local host. This is just default configuration. You could point it to your LDAP identity vault. Hopefully your connection is secure, and off you go. Similarly, you can be using Active Directory, and you can join an Active Directory domain with the ever-called workgroup default, or you might be using Kerberos, and in that case, again, you can join the domain and have authentication through Kerberos. So this is new functionality that we're actually releasing to the public today. It's very nice enhancement. We see that the first step deploying an appliance is obviously network configuration, but right after that you have to have the users to consume the functionality that the appliance is exposing. So we are trying to enhance the web interface so that you can deploy to local authentication vaults more easily, more streamlined way to do it. Good. So this concludes the overview that we have today. This is WebBased 1.1, part of the Appliance Toolkit 1.1. Additional resources can be found on Novell's site. As I already mentioned, there is another recording of the earlier version that shows you the wizard mode, and it goes over the modules that I chose to skip. There is also a video demo of the SUSE Lifecycle Management Server on Novell's video gallery. This is quite nice because it shows you another component of the Appliance Toolkit, which is very interesting in of itself, but it is also a component that uses a WebBased configuration interface for deployment. There is an appliance demo you can download. It will give you a very nice overview of what full integration of WebBased within an appliance is, as the SUSE Lifecycle Management Server uses WebBased not only in the modules that you're seeing here, which are standard configuration modules. It has its own custom configuration so that you can configure SLMS itself through the WebBased interface. So it's a very nice view of the full vision of WebBased in production. I highly recommend it. That's it for today. Thank you very much.